Golden light swept across the marble floors of Vale Tower. CEO Aria Vale stood in the center of the lavish party, raising her glass. To legacy and power that never fades. Everyone applauded. Suddenly, a janitor bent down to mop spilled wine right at her feet. Aria raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Watch where you mop, janitor. You almost touched my heels." The man replied, his voice deep and calm. "Sorry, ma'am. I clean what people spill, even if it's not just wine." The entire hall burst into laughter. 3 months later, she sat in the boardroom, her face pale as her secretary announced, "Ma'am, Vale Corp has been purchased by Carter Holdings." The door opened. The janitor walked in. Meet Jack Carter, single father, night shift janitor at Vale Corp. But there's more to his story than anyone knows. Every night, while cleaning the executive floors, Jack would read the financial reports left carelessly on desks. Numbers didn't lie, even when the people presenting them did, and Jack was starting to see a pattern that troubled him. Meet Aria Vale, 28 years old, beautiful, brilliant, and ruthless CEO who inherited Vale Corp from her father. She believed power meant never having to acknowledge the people beneath her. Jack worked quietly, efficiently, invisibly, until Aria made him visible for all the wrong reasons. "If you cleaned as fast as you stare, this floor would shine," she'd say whenever she caught him glancing at documents. "Yes, ma'am. I prefer to make sure it's really clean," Jack would reply, never taking the bait. One evening, Jack's 8-year-old daughter, Ella, visited him at work. She placed a paper crane on the security desk with a note, "Clean hearts build strong towers." The security guards laughed. "Looks like even the janitor's kid wants a job here." Jack simply smiled. "She already has one, teaching me patience." But the real humiliation came during Vale Corp's biggest product launch of the year. The event was being broadcast live on financial news networks. Investors, reporters, and industry leaders filled the marble lobby. Aria stood at the center of it all, radiant in her power suit, fielding questions from reporters. That's when Jack was ordered to mop the floors around the interview area. "Can't this wait?" he asked the supervisor quietly. "Ms. Vale wants everything perfect. Clean around them." So Jack found himself on his hands and knees, mopping marble floors while Aria spoke to millions of viewers about Vale Corp's vision for the future. The camera operator, trying to get a dynamic shot, panned across the scene and accidentally captured Jack working in the background. Aria noticed immediately. Without missing a beat, she gestured toward Jack and said to the reporter, "You see, we build vision, not vacuum. Everyone has their place in the ecosystem." The entire room erupted in laughter. Jack paused his mopping and looked directly at Aria. The camera was still rolling when he said, "Then I hope your vision is spotless." More laughter from the crowd, but something in Jack's tone made Aria's smile falter slightly. The clip went viral within hours. The janitor, who didn't blink, became a trending hashtag. Most people shared it as comedy, the working-class man who dared to talk back to his boss. But a few viewers noticed something else. The way Jack looked at those financial documents, the confidence in his voice, the fact that he didn't seem intimidated, just patient. Later that night, after the cameras were gone and the executives had left, Jack continued his rounds. He found Aria's office door open, her computer still logged into the company's financial dashboard. The numbers confirmed what he'd suspected for months. Vale Corp was hemorrhaging money. The flashy product launches, the expensive parties, the lavish headquarters, it was all funded by creative accounting that would make Enron blush. Jack pulled out his phone and took pictures of the screen, not to blackmail or expose, but to protect the hundreds of employees who had no idea their company was built on quicksand. As he finished cleaning Aria's office, Jack noticed a framed photo on her desk. Aria with her father, the founder of Vale Corp. Both smiling, both confident, both completely unaware that the empire they'd built was about to crumble. Jack had seen this before. Companies that confused revenue with profit, growth with sustainability, power with competence. But he'd also learned something important over the years. Sometimes the best way to clean up a mess is to own the building first. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever seen someone humiliated just because they were at the bottom? And if you believe that the silence of the righteous speaks louder than the laughter of crowds, remember to subscribe to Hero Dad's Stories to see what happens when the underestimated take back control. 2 weeks after the viral video, Arya decided it was time to make changes. The board was pressuring her about declining profits, and she needed a scapegoat. "We're implementing immediate cost reductions," she announced to her senior staff, starting with unnecessary personnel. Gavin Morrison, her chief advisor, had prepared a list. Jack Carter's name was at the top. "The janitor?" Arya asked, surprised. "He's been asking too many questions. Security caught him photographing documents." It was a lie, but a convenient one. That afternoon, Arya called Jack into her office. He stood quietly while she delivered the news. "Mr. Carter, we're terminating your employment, effective immediately. Unauthorized access to confidential information." Jack didn't protest. He simply asked, "Have you read the quarterly balance sheet carefully?" "I don't read garbage." Jack nodded slowly. "Then I suppose you don't know the company loses money every time you say the word vision." "Huh," Arya laughed. "I say that word every day. We're still profitable. Only because it's someone else's profit in your books." The comment seemed absurd. How could a janitor understand corporate finance better than a CEO with an MBA from Wharton? But something in Jack's tone made Arya's smile falter. A month later, Arya's world began crumbling. She arrived at work to find her assistant, Margaret, frantically making phone calls. "What's the emergency?" "Ma'am, the main investment account. It's empty." "What do you mean empty?" "Every liquid asset we had in reserve, gone. Transferred out over the past 3 weeks." Arya felt her knees go weak. "How much?" $200 million. Gavin rushed in, trying to look calm. "It's just an accounting error, a technical glitch in the transfer system." But Arya was already pulling up the shareholder records on her computer. What she saw made her heart stop. Carter Holdings, 49% ownership. "Who the hell is Carter Holdings?" she shouted. Jack's small apartment across town. He was helping Ella with her homework at the kitchen table when his phone buzzed with a text message. "Transfer complete." Jack looked at the screen and calmly replied, "Good. Phase 1 finished." Ella looked up from her math problems. "Dad, what's phase 1? "Cleaning up a mess that's been building for a long time, sweetheart." Back at Vale Corp, panic was setting in. Arya called an emergency board meeting. The conference room filled with worried investors and executives, all demanding answers. "How did we lose controlling interest in our own company?" Board member Harrison Webb demanded. Gavin stood up, his usual confidence shaken. "We're investigating potential fraud. Someone has been systematically acquiring our stock through shell companies." "Shell companies?" Webb's voice rose. "How do you systematically acquire 49% of a publicly traded corporation without anyone noticing?" Arya had been wondering the same thing. She'd spent the last 3 days going through every transaction, every contract, every deal Vale Corp had made in the past 5 years. That's when she found it. "The waste management contracts," she whispered. Everyone turned to look at her. "We outsource all our waste management to Carter Recycling Solutions. Have for 5 years. They handle everything. Document shredding, electronic waste, office furniture disposal." Webb frowned. "So they've been getting paid in stock options instead of cash. Small percentages. Barely noticeable individual transactions." The room went silent as the implications sank in. "You're telling me," Webb said slowly, "that our garbage company now owns half of Vale Corp?" Arya nodded, her face pale. "And Carter Recycling Solutions is a subsidiary of Carter Holdings." Gavin was frantically typing on his laptop. "But that would mean someone has been planning this for years, systematically, collecting our discarded assets and converting them into ownership stakes." "Someone who had access to our building," Arya said quietly. "Someone who knew which contracts were being renewed. Someone who could see which documents we were throwing away." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Gavin's typing. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been trying to contact Carter Holdings' CEO to arrange a meeting. They finally responded." "What did they say?" They said their representative will be here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for the transition meeting. Transition meeting? Ma'am, with 49% ownership in our current debt situation, they effectively control the company. They can call for a complete restructuring. Arya felt the room spinning. Do we know who their representative is? Gavin looked at his screen. Just says Jay Carter, CEO and founder. That night, Arya sat alone in her office, looking out at the city lights. Her empire, her father's legacy, was about to be handed over to a mysterious garbage collector who had somehow outsmarted every financial advisor, every lawyer, every board member she'd trusted. She thought about Jack Carter's last day, the way he'd smiled when she fired him, the strange comment about profits and vision. "I clean what people spill," he'd said, "even if it's not just wine." For the first time, Arya wondered if he'd been talking about more than just mopping floors. Tomorrow morning, she would find out exactly what Jack Carter had been cleaning up all these years, and she suspected it was going to be the most expensive lesson of her life. 9 a.m. sharp. The boardroom at Vale Corp had never felt smaller. Arya sat at what used to be the head of the table, flanked by her remaining executives and lawyers. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the mysterious Carter Holdings representative. The door opened. Jack Carter walked in, wearing a simple navy suit instead of his janitor uniform. But it was unmistakably him. The same calm eyes, the same patient expression. "What is this joke?" Arya demanded, half standing from her chair. "Not a joke," Jack replied, taking the seat directly across from her. "Just cleaning up again." She stared at him, her mind racing. You can't be..." "Carter Holdings. My wife started the company before she passed. I just grew it quietly." The room was dead silent except for the sound of papers rustling as lawyers frantically reviewed documents. Arya's voice trembled. "You were..." "My father's CFO." Jack nodded. "Was, until your father and Gavin made me sign off on the books." Sonarirum. He opened a manila folder and spread out documents across the table. Financial statements, merger agreements, asset transfers, all bearing the letterhead Vale Carter Merger, 2012, fraudulent asset swap. "Your father offered me a choice 12 years ago. Keep quiet about the accounting irregularities, or lose my job and face criminal charges for financial misconduct." Arya felt the room spinning. That's not possible. Dad would never..." "Your father was a good man who made bad choices when the company was failing. Gavin convinced him that creative accounting was the only way to save jobs." Jack pulled out a thick contract, yellowed with age. "I chose option 3. I documented everything, transferred my legitimate assets to my wife's waste management company, and disappeared." Gavin, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "You had no right to those assets." "I had every right to what I'd earned honestly. What I didn't have a right to was watching you steal from pension funds to cover investment losses." The words hit the room like a bomb. Board member Harrison Webb leaned forward. "Pension funds?" Jack opened another file. "Vale Corp has been borrowing against employee retirement accounts for 8 years. Every flashy product launch, every expensive party, funded by stealing from the people who built this company." Arya's face went white. "You left me with nothing." "No," Jack said quietly. "I left with my daughter. That was enough." He gestured around the marble-clad boardroom. All of this, it's built on other people's futures. Your employees don't know their retirement savings are gone. The investors don't know their returns are fake. The government doesn't know the tax reports are fiction." Webb was frantically making notes. "Mr. Carter, are you saying Vale Corp is essentially a Ponzi scheme?" "I'm saying Vale Corp is what happens when you prioritize appearance over substance for so long that you forget the difference." Arya stood up, pacing behind her chair. "You could have destroyed me years ago. Why didn't you?" Jack's expression softened slightly. "Because destroying you wouldn't have helped the 800 employees who depend on their paychecks. It wouldn't have returned the pension money. It wouldn't have fixed the system. So what's this? Revenge? This is reconstruction. The way I clean floors, carefully, thoroughly and with respect for the people who have to walk on them afterward. The twist that no one saw coming. Jack reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of waste management contracts, hundreds of them, spanning 5 years. You know what's profitable about garbage contracts? People throw away the most valuable things when they think nobody's watching. He spread out photographs, discarded hard drives, shredded documents, disposed office equipment. Every computer you've replaced, every document you've shredded, every piece of furniture you've discarded, it all went through Carter Recycling. Gavin's face went pale. Data recovery is illegal. Data recovery from illegally disposed confidential material that should have been properly archived according to federal regulations? That's called evidence collection. Jack opened his laptop and projected a screen showing terabytes of recovered data. 5 years of deleted emails, lost financial records, and communication logs that were supposed to be permanently destroyed. The room fell silent as executives realized the implications. The beautiful irony, Jack continued, is that every time you tried to hide evidence by throwing it away, you were literally paying me to preserve it. Uriah sank back into her chair. How long have you been planning this? Since the day you fired me, but not for revenge, for restoration. He closed the laptop. I spent 10 years as your janitor, watching you make the same mistakes your father made. Watching you prioritize stock prices over people's lives. Watching you build a legacy on quicksand. Webb looked up from his notes. Mr. Carter, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we clean house. Literally and figuratively. Jack stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. Vale Corp will be restructured as a benefit corporation. Profits will be shared with employees. Pension funds will be restored with interest. The fraudulent accounting will be corrected, and full disclosure will be made to regulators. And if we refuse, Gavin asked defiantly, then I release 5 years of evidence to the SEC, the IRS, and the Department of Justice. Vale Corp will be dissolved, 800 people will lose their jobs, and you'll spend the next decade in federal prison. The room was quiet except for the sound of traffic far below. Arya looked at Jack with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. You're giving me a choice my father never gave you. Your father was desperate. Desperation makes people do terrible things to good people. Jack turned back to face her. You're not desperate yet. You still have time to choose differently. What about you? What do you get out of this? Jack smiled for the first time since entering the room. I get to sleep at night knowing my daughter will inherit a world where janitors and CEOs both matter. Where cleaning up messes means fixing the system, not just hiding the evidence. He gathered his papers. You have 24 hours to decide. Clean up the mess honestly or watch me clean it up for you. As Jack reached the door, Arya called out, Why give me the choice at all? He paused without turning around. Because 12 years ago, someone told me that power without accountability is just destruction with a budget. I prefer construction. The door closed, leaving the board of Vale Corp to contemplate the most expensive cleaning bill in corporate history. 23 hours later, the media circus had begun. News vans lined the street outside Vale Tower. Financial reporters, investigative journalists, and camera crews all waited for what promised to be the business story of the decade. Inside the building, Arya hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night reviewing every document Jack had left behind, cross-referencing the evidence with Vale Corp's official records. Everything he'd said was true. Worse, it was verifiable. At 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Jack's deadline, Arya made her decision. She called a press conference. Standing at the podium in Vale Corp's marble lobby, surrounded by cameras and reporters, Arya looked directly into the lens of the lead camera. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to announce fundamental changes to Vale Corporation's leadership and business practices. The crowd of reporters leaned forward. Effective immediately, I'm stepping down as CEO and appointing Jack Carter as chairman of the board for Vale Corp's restructuring. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Who is Jack Carter?" That's when Jack appeared, walking through the crowd toward the podium. "The janitor?" a reporter called out, recognizing him from the viral video. "No," Arya said firmly. "The man who's been cleaning up our messes for 12 years. Jack took the microphone. Arya Vale isn't the villain here. The system is, when people forget that integrity comes before title. Instead of destroying her publicly, Jack was protecting her reputation while dismantling the corrupt structure. Ms. Vale has agreed to help us implement full transparency in corporate governance. She'll be heading our new Clean Start Foundation, a program dedicated to retraining displaced workers and restoring employee pension funds. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Carter, how do you respond to critics who say this is revenge? Revenge would have been releasing everything to prosecutors and walking away. Reconstruction means staying to fix what's broken. The crowd fell silent as Jack continued. For 10 years, I mopped these floors and watched good people work for a company that was stealing their futures. Today, we start giving those futures back. Another reporter. What about the executives responsible for the fraud? Gavin Morrison has resigned and will be cooperating with federal investigators. Others will face appropriate consequences. But our priority is protecting the 800 employees who had nothing to do with these decisions. After the press conference, Arya found Jack in what used to be her office. I don't understand, she said. You could have destroyed me completely. Why didn't you? Jack was standing by the window looking out at the city. Because destroying you wouldn't have taught your daughter anything useful. My daughter? Ella. She's 8 years old, just like you were when your father started this company. What do you want her to learn from this? Arya sat down heavily. I used to think shining floors meant servitude. Now I see, it means clarity. It means seeing things as they really are, not as we want them to be. That's when Ella burst through the door, running up to Jack with a paper crane in her hands. Dad, I made this for Ms. Vale. She handed the crane to Arya. Dad says everyone needs to learn how to fold away their past mistakes. Arya knelt down to Ella's level. That's very wise. Did your dad teach you that? No, Mom did. Before she went to heaven. Jack's expression softened. Ella, remember what Mom used to say about second chances? Everyone gets them, but not everyone takes them. Arya looked at the paper crane, then at Jack. Your wife, was she the one who started Carter Holdings? Sarah was a financial analyst. She saw the same problems I did at Vale Corp, but she believed in solutions instead of accusations. The waste management company was her idea. She said the best way to understand a business is to see what it throws away. And you've been carrying out her vision? I've been raising our daughter in a world where janitors and CEOs both matter equally, where cleaning up messes means fixing systems, not just hiding evidence. 6 months later, Vale Corp was unrecognizable. The marble lobby now featured a wall honoring all employees, from executives to maintenance staff. The pension fund had been restored with interest. The Clean Start Foundation had retrained and placed over 200 workers in better jobs. Most importantly, the company's new transparency policies had become a model for corporate governance nationwide. Arya, now director of the foundation, worked alongside Jack to implement ethical business practices across their industry. You know what I realized? She told him one day as they reviewed applications for worker retraining programs. What's that? For years, I thought power meant making people invisible. Now I understand that real power means helping people see themselves clearly. Jack smiled. Your father would be proud. He always wanted to build something that lasted longer than stock prices. And you, what do you want? Jack looked out the window at Ella, who was in the courtyard teaching other children how to fold paper cranes. I want my daughter to grow up in a world where the person mopping the floor and the person running the company both know they're equally responsible for keeping the building standing. That evening, as Jack and Ella walked home through the city streets, she asked, Dad, are you happy we don't have to clean floors anymore? We still clean floors, sweetheart. Now we just clean the whole building. Ella laughed. That's a lot more work. The best work always is. Above them, the lights of Vale Tower, now Carter Vale Group, shone against the evening sky, a symbol of what happens when cleaning up messes becomes about fixing systems rather than hiding problems. 1 year later, Vale Corp had been renamed Carter Vale Group with a new slogan, Clean Floors, Clean Books. Arya and Jack stood together at the grand opening of their Business Ethics Academy, cutting the ribbon on a program that would train executives in responsible corporate governance. The final scene took place in the Academy's main classroom. Ella held a brand new mop, looking up at the gleaming building that reflected the sky. "Dad, today I cleaned 3 rooms." "That's wonderful. Do you know why people still mop when floors are already clean?" "Because dust always comes back." "Exactly, in people's hearts too." The camera slowly pulled back. Golden light, the building bright with the Hero Dad Stories logo fading gently. On Ella's desk in the academy sat her latest school project, a detailed business plan titled, "How My Dad's Company Works." But it wasn't just about profit margins and organizational charts. Ella had written in the margins, "The most important part isn't the money, it's remembering why we build things. To help people, not to show off." Jack watched his daughter work, realizing that Sarah's greatest legacy wasn't Carter Holdings or the waste management company. It was the values she'd passed down to their daughter. Values that couldn't be bought, couldn't be stolen, couldn't be corrupted by corporate greed. "Ella, what's the difference between cleaning for show and cleaning for real?" Ella looked up from her homework, considering the question seriously. "Cleaning for show stops when people stop watching. Cleaning for real keeps going because it matters." Jack nodded, understanding that his 13-year-old daughter had just summarized everything he'd spent 12 years trying to teach a corporate boardroom. The academy around them buzzed with activity. Former executives learning humility, former janitors learning leadership, and everyone learning that the most important metric in business isn't quarterly profits. It's how many people sleep better at night because of the work you do. Every polished floor in the building reflected not just the ceiling lights, but the faces of people who had learned that true success isn't measured in stock prices. It's measured in the values you pass down, the systems you improve, and the dignity you restore to honest work. Some people mop floors to survive. Some people mop floors to find their honor again. But the truly respectable ones, they mop floors so others don't slip and fall into their own arrogance. Where are you watching from? Which moment gave you chills? When he was humiliated, or when the CEO heard "I clean what people spill" for the second time in the boardroom? Comment to help this story reach further. And if you believe that honor can come from the smallest actions, hit subscribe to Hero Dad Stories, where we tell stories about fathers who make the whole world go silent.